Welcome to the Community Service at Rutgers online training module for reflection. In this video, you will learn the definition of reflection, why it is incorporated into community service, and the varying types of reflection you can lead with your volunteer group. At Rutgers University, we highly value community service and the experiences that students receive by participating in different community service initiatives. We provide volunteer opportunities like Scarlet Day of Service, Winter Wishes, Elijah's Promise Service Days, and the Semester of Service program, and we incorporate reflection into all of these service activities. Reflection is an extension of the volunteer experience. It leads to learning and a stronger commitment to volunteering in the future. Reflection serves as a bridge for connecting what students learn in their service experience to their daily lives. There are many benefits to leading reflection after service. Reflection can be done in many different formats, such as writing, group discussion, questioning, crafts, and even games. It's always important to be prepared for each reflection. Make sure to prepare all necessary materials for a reflection activity and/or questions for a group discussion. Community Service at Rutgers has partnered with the Center for Civic Reflection to make reflections meaningful to students beyond just the highs and lows of their service experience. The Center for Civic Reflection is a nonprofit developed to help students involved in service with their reflections. This is the ideal form of reflection and is focused on a centerpiece of art like a poem, short story, video, painting, or any other focus piece. For this module, we will use the poem What I Learned from My Mother by Julia Kasdorf. Community Service at Rutgers highly encourages the civic reflection model, and there are a variety of readings available for you at civicreflection.org. Reflections should start off with a big idea, question, or theme. What do you want to get people thinking? Here you will want to choose a general opening question about service like, what impact does one's individual act of serving have on the community? Or, what does it mean for you to serve others? Next comes the introduction. How will you describe this activity of civic reflection? And how will you ask the participants to introduce themselves? You may want to start by explaining that civic reflection helps individuals find new meaning in a shared experience. Post-service reflection is important because it leads to continued thoughtful action going forward. Then, you would want to ask everyone to please go around the circle and say their name again just so you can be sure that everyone knows each other and feels comfortable. Next, you can establish expectations or ground rules. What structure will you set? What will you ask of participants? Invite them to be present during this discussion. Invite everyone to participate in some way as they feel comfortable. To pass is okay. Ask everyone to give each other a chance to speak and listen to each other's comments. These are just a few examples of ground rules. Ask the participants to come up with their own so they have a vested interest in the reflection. You will then lead the opening exercise. What question or scenario will you ask people to consider? Choose one or two questions. These should be general questions that everyone should feel comfortable answering based on their experiences with service. Here are some examples of the opening exercise. Why do you serve others? What is one word to describe your feeling when you serve someone who is in emotional distress? Next, read aloud. What part of the reading will you have people read aloud? Who and how will they read? Ask each person to read one line or stanza. Participants may need to repeat this until the poem is finished. And if someone does not feel like reading, they can skip their turn. For the purposes of this module, we will read aloud the poem What I Learned from My Mother by Julia Kasdorf. This poem can be found on the Center for Civic Reflection website. What I Learned from My Mother by Julia Kasdorf. I learned from my mother how to love the living, to have plenty of vases on hand in case you have to rush to the hospital with peonies cut from the lawn, black ants still stuck to the buds. I learned to save jars large enough to hold fruit salad for a whole grieving household, to cube home-canned pears and peaches, to slice through maroon grape skins and flick out the sexual seeds with a knife point. I learned to attend viewings even if I didn't know the deceased, then press the moist hands of the living, to look into their eyes and offer sympathy, as though I understood loss even then. I learned that whatever we say means nothing. What anyone will remember is that we came. I learned to believe I had the power to ease awful pains materially like an angel. Like a doctor, I learned to create from another's suffering my own usefulness, and once you know how to do this, you can never refuse. To every house you enter, you must offer healing, a chocolate cake you baked yourself, the blessing of your voice, your chaste touch. Then comes the bulk of the reflection. It's time for questions. What questions of clarification, what's going on here, interpretation, what do you think of what's going on here, and implication, what does this poem have to do with service, will you ask? Identify 2 to 3 of each kind. Clarification asks, what's going on in this poem? Here are some examples of clarification questions. What is the most impactful thing the narrator has learned from her mother? What is the significance of the narrator learning from her mother specifically and not another person? What are some examples of suffering in this poem that the narrator uses to make her point? Interpretation asks, what do you think of what's going on in this poem? Here are some examples of interpretation questions. Can you relate to the experiences that the narrator describes? Why or why not? What does the narrator mean by saying, I learned that whatever we say means nothing, what anyone will remember is that we came? How is the narrator making a difference? Take your time. You may want to ask, before we move on, is there another interpretation we didn't explore yet? Does anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to share yet want to share anything? Pause after asking your questions. Allow students to become comfortable with silence and give them time to process before responding. Implication asks, what does this poem have to do with service? Some implication questions might say, what motivates people to do good? Is it better to look at the bigger picture or focus on something specific, for example, the service we did today? The last step is the closing. How will you close the discussion? How will you leave it open but still create closure? You can leave this open to students and not have them respond, rather leave it as something to think about on their own. Here is an example of an open-ended question. What is one small thing you can do to make an impact after today's service? If you want to enhance the volunteer experience further, talk to the contact person at your community partner site. Ask them if they have any specific information about the impact students have made on your volunteer day. Sometimes community partners like to lead their own reflection as well. However, be mindful that sometimes students are uncomfortable with having their site contact present and could potentially hold back from reflecting because of their presence. This is especially true if they had a negative experience. Try and gauge your students' comfort and reflect accordingly. Last but not least, remind your student volunteers that there are many opportunities at Rutgers to get involved in community service with the Student Volunteer Council, alternative breaks, other community service programs, and student organizations. They can visit communityservice.rutgers.edu for more information. Thank you for participating in this online training on reflection after community service. We wish you luck in your community service project and hope for a successful reflection.